For Spolette tubes, Spolettes in this project, I'll be using these tubes from Caleb. They're 12 inches long, 5/8 inch OD, 5/16 ID. I have some nice tooling that fits snugly inside these tubes. I'm going to be cutting Spolette tubes 3 inches long. Since I'm going to be incorporating rising tails on these shells, I want a nice long Spolette tube. 3 inches long is a good length to use here. So I've marked these at 3 inches, getting 4 tubes out of each length, 12-inch length of the tube. And I'll just be cutting the tubes at 3 inches long. Then I coat them with clear PVC cement. This is the thin, standard, regular clear PVC pipe cement. There's not pasted paper going to be against these Spolette tubes, but there is some glue at the various stages. Fulcanelli emphasizes to use glue at different stages to ensure a really good seal around the Spolette where it enters the shell. And I don't want the moisture from that glue soaking in to the Spolette and ruining the powder grain or dampening the match that's inside there. So I will coat the tubes with PVC cement. This cement, a thin coating of this cement, dries in 5 or 10 minutes. This is just a little bit of insurance that I've learned to incorporate after dropping some dud shells that were pasted, where the moisture migrated through a relatively thin Spolette tube and caused the black powder grain to not pass fire to the black match. So I just have learned to incorporate this little step of insurance, the PVC cement coating, to prevent that possibility. These are a pretty thick Spolette tube, and I'm not using pasted paper, so probably wouldn't have a problem with moisture, but better safe than sorry. I want to make the Spolette for the shell now. As detailed in the paragraph in the project, I want a number 5 Spolette, which is 5/4 of an inch, 1 1/4 of solid powder, and I also include a 1/4 inch to be drilled back. So that 1.5 inch of solid, I'm going to ram 1.5 inch of solid powder, ram a 1/4 inch deep depression into that powder, and then I sweeten that up with this drill back pin vise that made from Caleb. I've adjusted the bit so when that is drilled all the way in there to this shoulder, only 1.25 inches of the solid powder is left. So I will ram 1.5 inches of the where's my little funnel? Right, little funnel. I'll put, I'm using the 0.5 cc scoop for these increments. I like Alfredo's little tip of just slightly dampening the end of that powder grain now to really produce a solid end. That makes a really glassy solid end, which will dry pretty quickly. And I'll keep ramming increments until I get my 1.5 inches of powder rammed in there. That's going to bring me where this green line, the second green line, is just above the top of the tube by about 1/16 of an inch. I'll try to show all the steps in the construction of this shell in detail. because it's good to have a refresher on all these steps as we go through each project. And this type of shell I really want to focus on for the next set of projects as we incorporate various effects and garnitures into this type of shell. So I really want to focus on being able to make this shell almost as second nature. Looks like I need one more increment. Now I have a little over 1.5 inches of powder rammed in there. I'm going to ram it with my pointed rammer. Which makes a depression in there. Now I will sweeten that up with the 1/8 inch bit in my pin vise until it's right down to the shoulder. And when that's done, I know I have exactly 1.25 inches of solid powder in there for the timing I want on these shells. That of course can be lengthened a little bit, shortened a little bit for different effects or different strength of powder that I'm using. In this Spolette I'm using Go X4FG powder, which I like a lot. So there's the rammed powder grain in that Spolette. I'm going to make a total of 4 shells, so I'll ram 4 of those Spolettes. Now I want to match and nose the Spolettes. I'm using some nice fat black match. And I'm making sure I've got a good clean cut on the ends. And I'm going to put, I want to leave the match sticking out of the Spolette a good 1.5 inches to 2 inches. And put probably 3 or 4 pieces of this size match in there. Yeah. Probably 4. I like to get the cavity pretty nicely filled, but not rammed so full that it blocks the fire coming out of there. 4 pieces of this match are good. And I'm going to put 2 turns of this 40-pound 1-inch gummed tape to nose it. There's 1 turn, there's 2 turns, plus a little bit. So 2 turns is about 4 inches, 4.5 inches. I am not using the gum on the gum tape. I'm just putting a little bead of Elmer's glue on the edge of the tape. And then a little bead where it's going to seal to itself. And I'm only wrapping or lapping that tape, that nosing, onto the Spolette tube 1/4 inch. I want as much of this Spolette tube as possible sticking out of the shell to adhere my rising tail to and my matching and nosing when I finish the shell. So I want as little as possible of this Spolette lapping inside or extending inside the shell. So that nosing is only lapped onto their 1/4 inch. Do the typical there. Typical tying and piercing. And then depending on whether I am going to use just a black powder only burst on this, in which case I will not put a flash tube or booster tube onto the end of the Spolette. That will create more of just a plain horsetail effect. But if I am going to use a booster, now I want to put a flash booster tube onto the end of the Spolette. So I've got this nosed, tied, and pierced in 2 locations. I'll do that with my other 3 Spolettes, and then I'll demonstrate how to install that flash booster tube if I desire one. I've got my 4 Spolettes matched and nosed and pierced. One of these I'm just going to show a plain black powder horsetail type burst with one of these shells. 3 of them I want to do different variations, but using this Sfera hot flash burst, 3/8 of an ounce, which is 10 to 11 grams that Mike Swisher specifies in the Spiderweb Star formula. I've got between 10 and 11 grams of that flash burst enhancer mixed up in that paper cup. I want to put a flash tube on the Spolettes that I'm going to put the flash burst on. Once again, it takes about 4.5 inches to go around the tube there. I'm going to cut a 4.5 inch long by 4.5 inch wide piece of 30-pound paper to put 2 turns of paper around that. What I have done is measured the diameter of the nosing on one of my Spolettes that tube's going to go around. That's about 0.635 inches. I have a tube here which is a little bigger than that. This measures about 0.7 inches. So I know if I roll a tube up on this, it will slip over the nosing on that. So I'm going to roll a tube up on this flash tube, up on this rocket tube, motor tube. I don't want this tube to telescope at all, so I'm putting a bead of glue on the first edge and then a bead of glue on the second edge to make sure that tube is well adhered into one unit like that. And I'm going to put a good bead of glue around the nosing on this Spolette here and just slide that over that. And that I can create just a little bit of a crimp there like that, and I'll let that dry before I put the flash in there, and I'll repeat that with the other 2 Spolettes that I'm going to put the flash burst charge enhancer into. To ensure that those tubes, flash tubes, stay in place and don't leak, I am going to put a clove hitch around that 1/4 inch glued section to ensure it can't go anywhere. Then I'll put my flash in there. Naturally, flash is the most powerful composition we use in general, in common practice, so want to be careful handling it, mixing it. This was diaper mixed, paper cup, paper diaper. Put the flash in there carefully. This is 3/8 of an ounce, 10 grams. This produces the nice wide, large, hard breaking spider type break. Since there's not much room for black powder burst charge in these shells, using these 1.5 inch comets, it's not a bad enhancer to use. And I can look down in there and crimp this right above the flash. And once again, I give it a little twist, and then put a clove hitch around that area. It's possible there's flash now up in the creases of that twist and fold. I can see a little gray dust down in there. So I'm a little leery of clipping off that area with scissors. So I usually just twist it good and tight like this and leave it as is. It's possible to use an anvil cutter like this that cuts fairly gently and cut that. I don't want to cut it with scissors though. I'll do that with the other 2 flash tubes. For the punch discs for this shell, where I'm going to be installing the Spolette into a punch disc, I don't have discs that are punched with the right size hole with 5/8 inch holes, laser cut from Caleb or anything. So I just punch my own discs. I'll need 8 discs, punch discs, and 8 solid discs for these 4 shells. I've got 1 disc marked pattern that's got a hole dead center in the middle of it, so I can center my holes very quickly and easily. And I'll punch 8 discs, and then my final step in the Spolette preparation is the gluing of the Spolette into one of the punch discs. And I employ a little bit of a special process to do that, to create a really good seal and to also keep that Spolette from sliding in the disc as I'm working on assembling the shell. I put a string tie, a glued string tie on either side, both sides of the first disc that goes into the shell. And those glued string ties keep that disc from being pushed into the shell during construction, which can be a issue as we're building a shell. You can find that out if you don't firmly adhere your Spolette into that first disc, I've found anyway. So there I've got 8 punched discs. Set my pattern aside for future use. And then what I'm going to do is I've got some nice soft cotton string here. This is my unboosted Spolette, has no flash powder on it. I'm going to put a ring of glue right where the nosing stops on that Spolette, which is just about 1/4 of an inch, 5/16 of an inch down onto the Spolette there. I'll put a clove hitch of this nice soft string actually on the Spolette tube, butting right up to the nosing, embedded in that glue fillet. That string tie keeps the Spolette from being pushed out of the shell during assembly. Pushing it right down to the top of the nosing creates a nice glue seal there. Then I put another glue fillet right on the edge of that string tie that I'll push the end disc into. Pushing that disc all the way down as far as I can there. Eyeballing it, make sure it's at 90 degrees in there. Then I'll put another fillet of glue on there and another string tie. That string tie will prevent the Spolette from being pushed into the shell during construction. Where are all my shell stands? Here we go. And that's a final fuse Spolette disc assembly, ready to be used in the first steps of assembling the shell. I have a nice 5/8 ID tube which can be used to push that string tie down as far as possible against the disc. And once that sets up, I eyeball and make sure my Spolette's at 90 degrees to that disc, and that's a nice fused disc assembly. I'll repeat that with the other 3 Spolettes.